For as long as human beings have walked upon the earth and looked up to the night sky at the vast, inky darkness of space, we've pondered a particular question over and over again. Are we truly alone in the universe? Surely it can't just be us, right? The stars and planets stretch out so vastly beyond the confines of our little blue world. It seems that there's at least enough room up there for some other forms of life to exist. But if they do, if there's someone or something out there, would they be friend or foe? Would an alien race be sympathetic to the plights of humanity? Or would they perhaps view us as a hostile threat, something to be wiped out before we had a chance to do the same to them? How would such a race even go about introducing itself to us? With a swift attack, a grandiose emerging from space, or maybe they try something far subtler, a subterfuge, observing us from a distance, watching, learning, all while hidden in plain sight. To answer these questions posed throughout the ages, the ideas that have inspired generations of science fiction writers, perhaps we should turn our gaze away from the stars. Let's start our story by instead looking at something smaller, something that might be the exact opposite of the incalculable vastness of space and all the mysteries it holds. This story, like so many others, begins not up there among constellations, meteors, and gas giants, but in a small rural town, a satellite, miles and miles away from the busy lifestyle of the nearest city, a place where everyone knows each other's face and where someone, no, something has been waiting, watching, concealed in the one place no one would expect. Now, it's worth remembering that when you live in a small town, being a local celebrity is essentially just the same as infamy. Saying that you're really famous in your hometown can be like admitting that you're considered the weirdest person in your direct vicinity. Sometimes the people with that mindset wind up strutting around their tiny township in the middle of nowhere, under the impression that they're God's gift to every passerby. Other times they garner odd looks and whispered stories from anyone that spots them. Gary knew more than his fair share of these types. He worked at a small family-owned convenience store, one of those places that everyone in town shopped at. Now, as any retail worker will tell you, no one who works in a shop ever really likes their job. Ultimately, it's usually just a way to get paid, with the promise of one day being able to wave goodbye to the cycle of stacking shelves and manning the cash register. And so, trapped in a small-town retail job, usually stationed in the one spot where he had to talk to every customer that came through the door, Gary had seen them all. From the ordinary and boring to the nasty and unreasonable. But on the other side of that list were the people who were just a little bit off. Those customers might look a bit shady or act a bit strange, not enough to draw everyone's attention, but still enough to be noticed. Almost like they felt uncomfortable in their own skin. One of the more infamous customers that Gary had encountered had garnered one hell of a reputation with his fellow employees. They even had a nickname for her, the Duchess, as those working in the shop knew her. She seemed mostly oblivious to other people around her until she needed something, and her way of asking for help was certainly strange, to say the least. Sometimes she might be rude or talk without specifying which of the store's employees she was talking to, but then there were the times where she seemed to be trying to engage in conversation with Gary or one of his coworkers. The Duchess might start out speaking with most of her own patterns, but would seem to try to copy the cadence or dialect of whoever she happened to be talking to. She'd copy accents, echo back particular phrases, or even other languages like she was mocking them or trying to mimic them. Naturally, every time she appeared in the store, Gary and the rest of the staff ran a mile, or at least hid in the break room out back until the owner of the store told them to all get back to work. But among the employees, caution was always advised when approaching or providing service to the Duchess, as if she could snap at a moment's notice. Whenever he saw her, Gary was reminded of his first encounter with this particular customer. He had been unlucky enough to be filling shelves when the Duchess had appeared out of nowhere. She forced a basket into his hands and instructed Gary to follow her around the shop. and fill it with items that she specified. Afterward, she told him to carry her bags of shopping outside and fill her car before she left. It was as though someone had altered Gary's job description to butler without telling him. No one fully understood why she always acted so bizarrely. There were plenty of rumors circulating, of course, ranging from the simple explanation of she's from a different generation to the more outlandish and wild theories. While he'd never fully believed in things like that, Gary always joked that she was so disconnected because she was actually from another planet. Sure, an alien disguised as a human coming to do their grocery shopping at a small-town store sounds impossible, right? Well, maybe. Around a week since his previous encounter with the Duchess, Gary noticed another customer in the store who seemed to be acting just as unusually. It was a man this time, wiry and tall but hunched over. When the man had first come into the store, Gary had spotted him muttering to himself. Instantly trapped once again behind the cash register, he felt his heart drop, immediately assuming the man might cause trouble. As he shuffled all around the store, slinking through the aisles, Gary could overhear him ranting about waffles? The wire-framed man was murmuring about waffles, how they were a pastry eaten for breakfast with syrup, how much humans enjoyed them. Humans. He hadn't said us. He had specifically used the word humans. The man quickly corrected himself with the proper word, almost as if he was teaching himself how to speak. Naturally, as anyone else working retail would, Gary assumed the man was inebriated. As was often the case, no matter how strange someone in the store was acting, the staff would ultimately forget all about them by the time their long 8-hour shift drew to a close, and they were eventually allowed to go home. But maybe it was becoming more frequent, because for some reason, Gary couldn't help noticing even more weird behavior from people all over town. Sometimes it'd be somebody he knew, a neighbor, a dog walker, the one jogger he'd see on their way back from the park as he was heading home after work. One day they'd be themselves, the next day they'd be, well, alien. Every time he spotted one, it seemed that another would appear the very next day. Little did Gary know, things were only due to get even stranger still. Over the next month, staff from the store stopped showing up for their shifts. Gary's manager was in pieces trying to call his employees to find out exactly why they weren't notifying him about their unscheduled absence. Each one never gave a clear answer. The more of them stayed home, the longer Gary found himself having to pick up the slack and cover their shifts. At first, when it was just an extra 1 or 2 shifts a week, he didn't mind so much. Working more hours meant extra pay. But as more and more of his colleagues seemed to disappear without a trace, Gary started finding himself spending more time at work than at home, and feeling pretty unhappy about it, to say the least. After all, what good is all that extra overtime pay if you can't get any time to spend it? Just as Gary's exhaustion from having to work so much was reaching its peak, taking so much of a toll that he could barely stay awake at the checkout, that's when she appeared again. The Duchess looked different this time though, and definitely not as the result of a dramatic makeover. Immediately, Gary noticed some kind of growth swelling out from the Duchess's shoulder. He didn't want to stare, that would be just as rude if not worse than making a comment about it, but he was certain it hadn't been there before. On this particular day, the Duchess had seemingly also decided to be more unreasonable than usual. Instead of just making Gary carry her groceries out to her car again, she was insisting that he bring them all the way back to her house. Naturally, Gary told her what any reasonable person would, explaining calmly that he couldn't leave the store during his shift, in the interest of putting his own safety first. Wrong move. The Duchess didn't seem to understand the concept, repeatedly stating that this was non-negotiable. Now, when someone in Gary's line of work is faced with an unreasonable and unusual request, the only person that can come to their aid is their manager. Unfortunately, a long debate with the Duchess was a battle that Gary's boss just couldn't win. Eventually, after talking in circles with the Duchess, the store owner folded, telling his employee to do as she asked, while he stayed behind and watched the cash register. Begrudgingly, Gary picked up the Duchess's groceries as she led him out of the store. Big mistake. Although it wasn't far and Gary wasn't really listening, the strange customer seemed to be talking about a gathering she was hosting with a group of local townsfolk waiting at her home. Sure, that sounds normal enough for some small-town folk. When there's limited number of people who live near you, loving thy neighbor usually becomes your only option for socializing. But Gary wasn't expecting the sight that awaited him when he arrived at the Duchess's house. Just as she had said, there was a huge group of locals there, all of them milling around idly, staring at Gary with wide, unnerving eyes, not blinking as he carried the groceries indoors. As if that wasn't strange enough, almost all of them seemed to be sporting the same type of growth as the Duchess, bulging out of their shoulders or just visible under shirt collars. Just like back in the store, Gary tried to force himself not to stare, never letting his eyes linger for too long on one of the silent, staring townsfolk or their strange protrusions. But maybe he would have been safer if he'd stared. Maybe he would have noticed the group of them huddling around him, shuffling closer while his back was turned. If he stared, he might have spotted the hands reaching up towards him, and he might even have seen what looked like his co-workers, the friends he had from the store, all huddled at the back of the room. As far as his boss knew, Gary returned within a few minutes, followed shortly by the rest of his staff. The store owner spent a few minutes angrily berating them for not showing up to work on time, not thinking to question where they'd all been or why they all came back to the store when Gary did. Each of his employees simply stood there, staring at him, hanging off every word, like it was the first time they heard a human being speak, or like they were learning how to. The truth was, neither Gary nor any of his colleagues made it back to the store that day. The things that came back in their place only looked like Gary and the others on the outside. Just like the other people in the town, more and more of them had been acting strange, speaking in odd patterns and sporting strange growths on their bodies. No one knows how long it took for everyone to be replaced. Some mysterious organization swept into town a few weeks later. A number of people, or the things that were disguised as people, all disappeared soon after. Any actual humans that were left behind didn't notice, forgetting how many others used to live in the town, as if they had been drugged. With the local store closing its doors and fewer people around, most of them packed their belongings and moved on, heading to live elsewhere. Eventually, the town fell silent. If you were to pass through there today, you'd find nothing but the remains of a community that gradually changed into something alien. All that's left of the place now is a ghost town. You might even call it an empty shell. Few people would ever really understand what happened in that small rural town. Even those who did know would never admit to it. The SCP Foundation is like that, as you may well know. They're shady, secretive, and would much rather keep to themselves. Not unlike that group of townsfolk, actually. Well, that is, after they'd each been replaced by an instance of SCP-3994. The thing no one dares to ask about humanity looking up to the stars for so many centuries is, what if someone up there was looking back at us? What if, for the entire lifetime of our civilization, there's been a race of alien creatures attempting to study us, venturing to our backwater small town of a planet and taking the form of humans for some nefarious purpose? Meet SCP-3994. That is, if you haven't already been acquainted with one of them. They could be anyone, the local celebrity in your small town, a person who you pass on the street every day, even a wild animal. You see, SCP-3994 refers to a race of extraterrestrials, beings not of our world, and a currently unknown number of them have been cataloged by the SCP Foundation. SCP-3994s tend to hide in plain sight through the use of convincing human skin disguises, or shells. Well, while these shells might start by looking convincing, in actual fact, they're far from perfect. Almost 70% of SCP-3994 shells experience some form of rapid degradation, and this causes the imperfections in their disguises to shine through. A deteriorating human shell usually results in a number of physical deformities. An SCP-3994 instance wearing its shell might appear as someone with a limb that twists and bends in an unnatural way, but showing no signs of actually noticing it. Alternatively, a person who seems to have a skeleton that doesn't match their external bodily proportions might also be an extraterrestrial in hiding. And then, there's the growths that some SCP-3994 shells have. These are severe malformations that resemble elephantiasis, a medical condition that causes certain areas of the body to enlarge. But just looking out for these tells isn't a surefire way of spotting one of these aliens. Not all their shells have the same levels of decay. In fact, the Foundation has developed subcategories of SCP-3994 instances based on how noticeable their shells are. Category A are SCP-3994s whose shells are almost impossible to detect, practically resembling human beings one-to-one. On the other side are the Category Cs, which are members of the same extraterrestrial species without shells. And between them, in Category B, are the ones whose shells are showing signs of decay. Another method the SCP Foundation has used to detect instances of SCP-3994 is speech. In almost 40% of conversations, these aliens will attempt to mimic the speech patterns of the human they are conversing with. This can be as blatant as SCP-3994's echoing back elements of speech, as hard to replicate as regional accents and dialects, different languages, or specific phrases unique to the person they're copying. While in some instances, SCP-3994s have shown difficulty with grammar and syntax at first, they seem to be quick learners. Couple that with almost perfect shells in Category A, and these alien visitors could prove to be formidable infiltrators. Researchers even discovered telepathic communications between instances. Eventually, though, all SCP-3994 shells do inevitably decay. This usually takes around a year, as their human disguises gradually dissolve until the creature beneath is eventually exposed. That's where the various protrusions, misshapen body parts, and other signs of decay come from. It's not that SCP-3994s are intentionally walking around with noticeable shells. It's that they can't prevent their shells from eventually withering away until their true self is put on display. And what do they look like under their disguises? Are they tall, slender, gray-skinned beings with long heads? Are they tiny little green men piloting human-sized robot suits? Could they even be bulbous creatures of living calcium with huge claws kept concealed and compressed in skin suits with zippers hidden under their hairlines? Well, no to all of these. That'd be terribly cliché, don't you think? Beneath their rapidly decaying shells is a viscous pulp-like substance of formless and unquantifiable composition. Without their disguises, SCP-3994 have no regular shape, no skeleton or body structure. Underneath, each of them is just an indeterminate mass that drags itself around aimlessly. So the one question that remains is, why? Why come to Earth? Why replicate and replace innocent humans? Why spend so much time trying to learn how to blend in as part of a civilization, like sinister imposters among us? Well, the ones in Foundation captivity seem to be pretty eager to leave. During multiple incidents, they have been known to create shells that mimic the appearance of security staff, scientists, and other Foundation personnel in order to orchestrate their escape. All the while, they've been showing themselves capable of learning how to impersonate human speech and mannerisms. But what is it all for? The best answer is, we don't know. Or rather, we don't know yet. Could they be here to study humanity? Do these SCP-3994s want to learn how to be more like us for their own benefit? Think about it. If you had no shape, no body, if you were just a formless mass, wouldn't you feel a little lonely? SCP-3994s, like humans, might be social animals. The difference is we can hug each other, high-five each other, converse, form meaningful connections through talking and touch. It could be that's where these extraterrestrial imposters want, why they decided to venture across the stars to live among us. That'd be nice, right? But then there's the other explanation. SCP-3994 are an alien army hiding out on Earth, learning more and more about us, day by day. The more they learn, the better they'll get at copying us, walking, talking, and acting no different from any other human. The Foundation doesn't even know just how many are out there. Soon they could have perfectly mimicked every language, every culture, every person on Earth. And what happens then? What happens when we all get replaced? Well, at that point, The planet would no longer belong to us. It would be the new home for SCP-3994. Now go check out SCP-2086 Man-Eating Bus and SCP-939 with Many Voices, the complete story, for more anomalies that are hiding in plain sight.